What would you do if a cop asked you to follow them right now and you had no clue whether it was a request or a trap? If you handle that moment the wrong way, you can turn a simple stop into a long detention, extra questioning, or a search you never meant to allow. One confused answer can make you look cooperative while giving away control. Hit subscribe right now because what I'm about to show you could help you stay calm when pressure hits fast. And tap like so you can find this again before you ever need it on the side of the road. If a cop asks you to follow them to another spot, step behind the patrol car, walk over to the sidewalk, or go somewhere just to talk, you need to know what changes and what does not. Your rights do not vanish because the officer sounds casual. Your rights do not vanish because the lights are flashing. And your rights do not vanish because you feel nervous. Let me show you exactly what to say, when to say it, and why the timing matters so much. You're about to learn the one question that tells you whether you're actually free to leave, the line that blocks fake consent, the silence rule that stops you from talking yourself into trouble, and the simple way to comply without volunteering for more. I've analyzed over 200 Bodycam videos, and you see the same mistake again and again. Drivers think they're being polite. What they're really doing is making the officer's job easier. Here's the problem. When you hear, "Hey, just follow me over here," your brain treats it like a normal instruction. Most people have no idea that those words can sit in a gray area. Sometimes it's a lawful order during a stop. Sometimes it's just a request. Sometimes it's a pressure move to get you away from your car, your passengers, your phone, or any witnesses. Here's the reality. If you do not know which one it is, you can end up saying yes to way more than you meant to. You may end up staying longer than the traffic stop requires. You may end up answering questions you did not need to answer. You may even help create the story the officer writes later. That is why your first job is not to argue. Your first job is to get clear. You need to know if you are being detained, if you are under arrest, or if the officer is just fishing. The first thing you do is force the moment to become clear. If an officer says, "Follow me," or "Come over here for a second," do not guess what they mean. Do not fill in the blanks for them. You ask one clean question. Here's exactly what you say. "Officer, am I being detained or am I free to leave?" Word for word. Memorize that line. That question matters because it makes the officer pick a lane. If you are free to leave, then you do not have to keep following along just because the request felt official. If you're being detained, then the officer is saying, "This is not voluntary anymore, and now the rules are different." Defense attorneys use this exact line in court because it helps show whether the encounter was a true detention or just pressure dressed up like a polite request. This comes straight from Supreme Court rulings. In United States versus Mendenhall, the court said a person is seized only when a reasonable person would believe they were not free to leave. In simple English, that means if a normal person would feel they had no real choice, it starts looking like a detention, not a friendly chat. That is why your question is so strong. You are not fighting. You are making the officer say what this really is. Watch what happens when you do not ask it. The officer says, "Just come stand over here." You walk over. Then he says, "Since you're here, mind if I ask a few questions?" Then he asks where you were, where you're going, who owns the car, whether there's anything illegal inside, and whether you mind if he takes a quick look. Now the stop is bigger. Now you are off balance. Now you're reacting. Bad way. Most drivers say, "Sure, no problem, whatever you need." Then the stop grows, the questions stack up, and the officer frames your cooperation as consent. Good way. Smart drivers say, "Officer, am I being detained or am I free to leave?" Then the officer has to clarify the situation before pushing you further. This is 100% legal. You're allowed to ask whether you are free to leave. You're allowed to ask whether you are being detained. That question does not make you guilty. It makes you informed. Now, if the officer gives a direct lawful order during a traffic stop, like ordering you out of the car, that can be different. In Pennsylvania versus Mims, the Supreme Court said an officer can order a driver out of a lawfully stopped car. So do not confuse a lawful order with a casual request. If the officer says, "Step out of the car," you comply. But if the officer says, "Come with me," "Follow me down there," or "Let's go talk over here," you still need to know if that move is required or voluntary. That is why this first question is your anchor. It keeps you from being pulled into a bigger encounter without knowing it. Have you ever been asked to move or follow an officer during a stop? Drop a comment below and tell me what they said. The second thing you do is refuse extra movement and extra consent without sounding aggressive. If the officer keeps pressing after your first question, you use your second line. You look at the officer and say this: "I will comply with lawful orders, but I do not consent to going anywhere voluntarily." Those exact words. Keep your voice calm, keep your hands visible, say it once, then stop talking. Here's why that line works. It does two things at the same time. First, it shows you are not resisting. That matters. You are saying you will obey lawful commands. Second, it blocks the officer from turning your politeness into voluntary consent. That matters even more. A lot of people think consent only means saying yes to a car search. That is too narrow. Consent can also show up when you agree to extra steps, extra movement, or extra conversation that the officer did not clearly have the legal right to demand. Here's the trick they don't want you knowing. A big part of manipulation is making the unusual feel normal. Just hop out. Just stand here. Just walk over there. Just come talk for a minute. Each step sounds tiny, but each step can move you deeper into an encounter you did not choose. Rodriguez v. United States matters here. The Supreme Court said a traffic stop cannot be stretched longer than needed for the traffic mission, unless the officer has separate reasonable suspicion. In plain English, once the tasks tied to the stop should be done, the officer cannot keep you there just to go on a fishing trip. Former police officers have confirmed this works because clear, calm language makes it much harder to blur the line later. Bad way, most drivers say, yeah, I can follow you, or sure, I'll come over there. Then a basic stop turns into extra delay, extra questions, and sometimes a search request. Good way. Smart drivers say, I will comply with lawful orders, but I do not consent to going anywhere voluntarily. Then you stay respectful while refusing to volunteer for more. Let me show you exactly why the wording matters. If you only say, I don't want to, that sounds emotional. If you only say, no, that can sound combative. But when you say you will comply with lawful orders while refusing voluntary movement, you protect yourself on both sides. You're not escalating. You're not helping. You're making the legal line visible. This is 100% legal. You can refuse voluntary movement. You can refuse voluntary contact beyond what the law requires. You can do that without raising your voice, without insulting anyone, and without acting scared. Now be smart here. If the officer says, you are being detained, stand here, do not walk away. If the officer says, step out, comply. If the officer says, turn around and put your hands behind your back, do not debate on the roadside. But if it is framed like a choice, treat it like a choice. Your goal is not to win an argument in the moment. Your goal is to stop yourself from donating consent by accident. The third move is the one that saves people from their own mouth. Once the officer starts asking off-topic questions, you shut it down. Listen closely because this is critical. Nervous talking is how a lot of cases get built. You may think you're sounding honest. You may think you're being helpful. You may think explaining more will make the officer relax. Usually it does the opposite. It gives the officer more to compare, more to challenge, and more to write down. Here's exactly what you say. I choose to remain silent, and I want a lawyer. Keep it simple. Keep it clean. Then stop. Do not add a speech after it. Do not explain why. Do not say, but I didn't do anything. Do not say, can I just tell you one thing? No, you invoke it, and you hold that line. Miranda v. Arizona is the backbone here. The Supreme Court said that if a person in custody says they want a lawyer, questioning has to stop until a lawyer is present. The court also said if the person says they do not wish to be questioned, police may not keep interrogating. Legal experts agree this is your strongest protection because silence cannot be twisted the way nervous answers can. Here's the reality. Many drivers think staying silent makes them look guilty, that fear gets used against you. But talking does not magically clear you. It often creates small gaps, small mistakes, and small contradictions. Maybe you say you were coming from work, then later say you stopped for gas. Maybe you say the car is yours, then later say it belongs to your cousin. Maybe you joke, ramble, or guess. Now the officer writes inconsistent statements. That phrase shows up again and again. Watch what happens when you talk too much. The officer says, why don't you just come over here and tell me what's going on? You walk over, then you start explaining every part of your day. 10 minutes later, the traffic stop is not about the traffic stop anymore. Bad way. Most drivers say, I've got nothing to hide. Ask me anything. Then the officer keeps digging until something sounds suspicious. Good way. Smart drivers say, I choose to remain silent and I want a lawyer. Then the questions stop giving the officer free material. This comes straight from Supreme Court rulings. And it matters because the road is not the place to prove how innocent you are with a long speech. The road is the place to avoid making things worse. If the officer truly has grounds, your talking will not save you. If the officer does not have grounds, your talking can help create them. That is why smart drivers do less, not more. Most viewers already clicked away. If you're still here, you're in the top 10%. Drop a comment saying I'm still here, because the next part ties everything together. There is one more move that makes all of this stronger. You keep asking whether the officer is giving a lawful command or making a request. You do not assume, you do not argue, you do not let vague words slide. Here's exactly what you say. Is that a lawful order? Or are you asking for my consent? That line is powerful because it forces plain English into a foggy moment. Terry v. Ohio helps explain why this matters. The Supreme Court said police need specific facts, not just a hunch, for a brief detention and frisk. In simple English, they need a real reason, not just a vibe. When you ask whether something is an order or a request, you stop the officer from hiding the difference inside tone, pressure, and fast talk. Bad way. Most drivers say, okay, I guess so, when they do not even know what they are agreeing to. Then their own confusion gets treated like cooperation. Good way. Smart drivers say, is that a lawful order or are you asking for my consent? Then the officer has to make the line clear. This matters because vague compliance is dangerous. If the officer later says you agreed, your unclear words may not help you. But if you calmly asked for clarification and refused consent, that tells a different story. This comes straight from Supreme Court rulings, and it fits the big theme of every case we just talked about. The law cares a lot about whether your movement, your answers, and your cooperation were truly voluntary or the result of pressure. Now put the cases together. Mendenhall is about whether a reasonable person would feel free to leave. Rodriguez is about police not stretching a stop longer than needed for the traffic reason without separate suspicion. Terry is about a brief stop needing real facts, not a hunch. Mims says an officer may order you out of a lawfully stopped car. Miranda protects your right to stop questioning and ask for a lawyer when custody kicks in. That means you should comply with real lawful orders, but you should never volunteer for extra movement, extra questions, or extra consent just because the officer sounds casual. So when the officer says, "Follow me," your brain should split the moment in half. Is this a lawful command tied to the stop, or is this a request for voluntary cooperation? Your words help answer that in real time. That is why these lines work together instead of alone. Let's walk through a real roadside scene so you can hear how this sounds. You're driving home at night. You get stopped for a broken taillight. You hand over your license and insurance. The officer comes back and says, "Hey, step out and follow me to my car. We're just going to talk for a minute." The wrong way starts fast. You say, "Sure." You leave your car. You stand where he wants. He asks where you were, whether you've been drinking, whether you have anything illegal, whether anyone else was in your car earlier, and whether you mind if he takes a quick look because you're already being cooperative. Now you feel stuck because you already said yes to everything before you even knew the game. Now the right way. First, if he says, "Step out," you step out. No attitude. Hands visible, calm voice. Then if he says, "Follow me to my car," you ask, "Officer, am I being detained or am I free to leave?" If he says you are being detained, you stay put and ask, "Is that a lawful order or are you asking for my consent?" If he says he wants you to come voluntarily, you say, "I will comply with lawful orders, but I do not consent to going anywhere voluntarily." If the questions keep coming, you say, "I choose to remain silent and I want a lawyer." Now compare the outcomes. In the first version, you helped turn a taillight stop into an open-ended investigation. In the second version, you stayed respectful, obeyed lawful commands, and refused to donate consent. That is the difference. You did not act tough. You acted clear. And clarity protects you. Defense attorneys use this exact line in court because every extra yes can become evidence of voluntary cooperation. Your job is to stop that chain before it grows. You're not trying to beat the officer with clever words. You're trying to keep the encounter inside its real legal limits. Next week, I'm revealing what to say when cops claim they smell weed from your car. Subscribe right now so you do not miss it, because that line gets used to justify searches every single day. So remember the play. First, ask, "Officer, am I being detained or am I free to leave?" Second, say, "I will comply with lawful orders, but I do not consent to going anywhere voluntarily." Third, if the questions keep coming, say, "I choose to remain silent and I want a lawyer." Fourth, if the wording is fuzzy, ask, "Is that a lawful order or are you asking for my consent?" When you know the difference between a command and a request, you stop getting pushed around by tone alone. When you stop volunteering movement, you stop expanding the stop for free. And when you stop talking, you stop building the case against yourself with your own mouth. Hit subscribe so you catch that weed smell video next week. Smash, like if this script just made you feel 10 times more prepared. And drop a comment telling me which line you're going to memorize first. Stay safe out there.